Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today. I'm going ahead and give us all about 30 seconds before we start. Excellent. All righty. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Mariela Salinas, and I'm a marketing specialist here at Educate 360. Welcome to today's webinar, What is a Project Management SOP, presented by the Managing Director at Velipy, Seamus Collins. We are in Zoom for today's session, and we will be sharing a copy of this recording with you in an email after the webinar. We do encourage participation throughout the webinar, so please use that chat or the Q&A option for our short Q&A after the presentation. Educate 360 is so excited to present this webinar today, so without further ado, I'll hand it over to you, Seamus.
Okay, thank you, Mariella. As Mariella said, I'm Seamus Collins. I work with a company called Velipy. We're part of Educate 360. I've been involved in project management with 25 years or something at this point, and 30 years actually. And I've been writing SOPs and helping companies put processes in place in many scenarios as well. I've been asked to come along today to talk to you briefly about project management SOP. Some companies might call them a project management guidelines document. I'm just trying to explain to you why you might need one. What is it at the end of the day? What would be the benefit your company would get from it? And then talk about artifacts and templates, the benefit of tying those into your SOP. And again, trying to reinforce the need for it, tying it into best practice from the PMI and other literature. And how does Educate 360 help companies put these things in place? And I'm happy to talk to you. If you're getting a recording of this after the session and you weren't able to attend, feel free to reach out to Educate 360. They'll put you through to me if you want to talk privately about your own scenario and what you have or what you may not have and what you might need to get. So again, feel free to reach out to me through Educate 360. I'm going to start with a simple story. And the story is as follows. When I was a young project manager, I hit a certain gate on a project, and there was a certain amount of reserve that wasn't spent. And the question I put to you is, what would you do if you had some monies left over at a certain phase of the project? And I suspect a lot of you might say, well, I'd roll it forward to the next phase. And that's what I did. And about a month after I did that, somebody internally approached my desk and said, where's that extra money? And I said, well, I rolled it forward and I've spent it. They said, Dad, who authorized you to spend that? That's not how we deal with reserves. Saying, but hang on a second, nobody said I couldn't, nobody said you could, and it became a bit of a big thing. But if I had an SOP explaining how that reserve should have been handled, or it was maybe, in some cases, maybe have it in my plan how this was going to be handled, that scenario would never have happened. I suppose that's where we start everything here, is that some people, when they come on our courses, you ask them have they seen a project management plan, and people give you a Gantt chart. That's not a plan, that's a schedule. You might say to them, have you got a risk register? And they say, oh yeah, we've got some risk stuff. Have you got a scope statement? Yes. Have you got how are you going to deal with changes? Oh yeah, we've got a change control process. But they haven't ever put it all together as a plan. And in many cases, some companies do not have those individual plans. They refer out to an SOP document and they say, this is how we deal with finance. This is how we deal with schedules. This is how we do risk management around here. They can have then all the outputs, the scope, the schedule, the cost. They can have the baselines, but the best practices around how they do something is written into their SOP. Okay. Now, again, if you need a change, then you might have variance into your plan. But the first thing I want you to think about is think of the scenario I was involved in here. Sometimes people in companies, they don't want people saying, oh, when I was in company X, we did it this way. oh, when I was in company Y, we did it this way. When they're in your company, you should be able to give them your SOP and your guidelines and say, look, you're not in company X or Y anymore. You're here. And if you think that place was so brilliant, go back there maybe. I shouldn't probably say that, but there's a way of doing work in many companies. And that's the first idea I get into your head is we need an SOP, right? We need a guidelines document, whatever you want to call it, to say this is how we do things around here. And I'll show you as we go through this the benefits of it in a bit greater depth. I suppose at the end of the day, project management, we would say, is a strategic asset. And what do I mean by that? Well, whatever you're doing today, it may not be what you're going to do tomorrow or next year. You may want to change your products or services. And projects are change agents. They bring us new products, they bring us new services. And project management is that, I suppose, way of getting that work done. But if we can optimize and make that efficient, well, then we can get there faster than our competitors. But the main thing I'm saying then is that we need to get better at this. And one way of getting better at something is very often to write it down and start to improve it and optimize it and lean it out over time. That's where you start to think here's that project management is important. And if you see project management is important, well, then why haven't we got an SOP around it so that we can get everyone on the same page and everyone doing it the right way, not the way they did it previously or what they think is a best practice. It should be a best practice for your product or service, for your company. So we start to see it then that project management, very often in companies, people have SOPs around, I don't know, expenses. People have SOPs around vacation. People have SOPs around everything. And you'd say to them, have you got an SOP for project management? And they go, we don't have that one. Like that probably is the most important one, So again, start to think about it like that. If you don't have one, why don't you have it? Are you letting everyone just spend lots of money and do it their own way? Are you letting everyone scope their own way, schedule their own way, score risks their own way? Why aren't we doing it one way? Why aren't we doing it the right way? And again, think back to what Peter Drucker said. If we can't measure it, we can't improve it. So again, start thinking about that. We need to write it down, get everyone on the same page, and then we can start to improve. Now, the main thing we start to see then is that there's a lot of money wasted in projects. And very often it's because of poor project management. And then you can root cause that back to, well, we never explained to them what the best practice was. So everyone did it their own way. And if you're spending millions of dollars in your company, 11.4% is probably a lot of money. Some companies would say to us that over 30% of their projects bring no benefit. So every year they spend millions of dollars, but a lot of dollars are spent and no benefit is ever accrued from them. And you can see here, in some organizations, 2/3 of them are an absolute fiasco. So again, think about why are they a fiasco? Now, what is the real root cause of that problem? And in many cases, it's a case of we didn't put the right rails around this. We didn't put the right governance in place. We didn't put best practices in place. We didn't put best practices in place around risk. They became issues. We didn't put best practice in place around communication, and now we have a problem. We didn't put best practice in place around scheduling. We didn't put best practices in place around cost management. They weren't documented. And then we have all this idea of project failure. And you can see this here that, as companies get better and better or more mature, and they optimize and lean out these processes and make them fit for purpose, you can see here projects, companies that have these maturity and have it written down, they're achieving more success. They're getting more value out of the dollars they invest. So again, this is directly from the PMI, but you can see here, companies with high maturity achieve the goals of the project. And even where they have high maturity, they're still struggling. So start to take some of this, and I'll send you all these slides after the presentation, or they'll be sent out to you by Mariella. But the bottom line is the first step towards maturity in any organization, and we would do maturity assessments for many people. The first step towards maturity is a common language. A common language. So the first step is the common language. The second step is a common process. And they're the first two steps on the Kerzner maturity model. So if you have no common language and you have no common process, well, then you are immature as an organization and your project management is immature. So then you're going to see waste, you're going to see failure. Okay. And again, I'm probably pushing, I want you to, be provoked by this a little bit, saying, actually, maybe he has a point. And if I don't, that's fine. But the data would say that, yes, this is a challenge in a lot of companies. So an SOP, at the end of the day, this is the definition of it, you know, established or prescribed methods to be followed, really, um, for the performance of operations or project management. Like, you're trying to say, this is the way we do it. This is the best way. This is our way of doing it. And that's the thing. I don't care if a project is 2 days, 2 weeks, 2 months, or 2 years, but there should be a way of approaching the work. There should be a common language. There should be a way of approaching it. We'll see that now. I'll draw that out another little bit for you. But think about your own company and say, well, we have SOPs about around everything, but we don't seem to have one about project management. And that's how we get work done. That's how more and more companies are projectizing their work to get it done. They talk about what's the scope, what's the timeline, how much will it cost, what resources do we need, what could go wrong, is there third parties involved, what are we going to do about stakeholder X? Is a project management language around a lot of this stuff. Okay. It's project management getting the work done. Okay. So, why would we develop one? So, if we summarize it here in this slide, we want to develop and implement a consistent approach. Okay. That we can repeat it then every time. This is the way we do things, and repeatable gets better and better as we optimize the process. The first thing in is we have a common language. People can talk to each other and understand. Everyone is using the same methodology. So you don't have someone saying, I've got a charter, somebody else saying, well, I've got a PID, and someone else saying, well, I call it a PID, and someone else saying, I've got a Gantt chart, I do mine in Primavera. Stop, right? It should be one way of doing it, all right? The same methodology, the same approach. This is how our company does this work. The other thing is that external stakeholders should get the same experience. So if you're a service provider to a company, you want them to get the same experience. You don't want, somebody saying, well, Mary did it a different way, or Lauren, I preferred Lauren's way of presenting to us. Everyone should be getting the same way. There should be a company experience saying, this is how we present our data. This is how we present our risks. This is how we manage our budget. This is how we select our subcontractors. There's a way, because it's documented in our SOP. This is a big point here at PMIS. Many companies I meet are trying to install project management information systems, but they have no process documented. So then the person implementing the PMS says, well, we want to customize this to fit your process. And sometimes people say, well, we don't really have a process. So then you have some PMIS provider dictating nearly to you what your process needs to be. And we see some companies with PMISs, when they buy them, they come back and they say, Seamus, look, we need to get you to document a process now first. So then that the PMIS can be wrapped around it and can automate that process for us. So if you're planning on implementing a PMIS, the PMIS will solve nothing unless it's supporting an underlying process that's well defined and well documented. And usually that takes the format of an SOP. The next thing here, then, I suppose the purpose of developing the SOP is to basically make sure that the latest thinking, the latest way of managing projects, the latest way of estimation, the latest thoughts around cost management, contingency management, reserve management is being used. And I suppose that is the, best practices evolve. And what maybe was best practice 5 years ago may no longer be the best practice. You might have put some way of managing risk in place, but now the company's in a different place and you need to take more risk, or you might need to be more risk averse, or there might be certain types of risk that now need to be escalated. I don't know. But again, if you have it documented in an SOP, it'll be very clear. What are senior management interested in? What risks should we escalate? Etc., etc. What decisions can we make ourselves? What decisions need to go up the ladder? Okay. The last part here, then, I suppose, is, if we have an SOP, people start to see that, there's a way of doing things. There's a career path very often in these companies tied into this to say, you can manage projects of a certain size. You can now move on in your career. So again, an SOP, I suppose, helps the development of the people in the organization. Why create any sort of templates associated? Well, it's a great way of being able to compare projects. So I've portfolios of projects to manage at the moment. But the only way I can look at them and compare and contrast is if everyone presents them in the same format. If somebody's presenting, well, I'm showing it to you this way with 10 slides, and someone else over here is just showing a 4 panel dashboard, I can't compare. I'm not getting the same level of detail. People very often can mask stuff on me. But if I have a template, I can actually then compare like with like, probing for the questions and answers that I want to get at, and giving that person as well the opportunity to ask me for what they need from me as a manager to say, well, Seamus, what I need from you this month is this. But if that's not in the template, sometimes you can have these ops reviews on projects and the stuff doesn't get teased out because maybe the template didn't support the conversation that should be happening around the project. Okay. So again, very often a suite of templates, tying them into the SOP is very important. And then all of that getting possibly implemented in a PMIS in due course. The main thing we would say, though, with a lot of templates is very often they're homegrown. Some of them will have errors in them, especially the financial ones. And again, sometimes we really annoy our stakeholders where we say, well, you've got the wrong template. I've got a different version here. And all you're doing then is you've become the process police nearly for your company, and you're not adding value where there's a lot of duplication. You're copying stuff between a charter and a scope statement, as opposed to actually putting the data in just one or the other, depending on your phase, and actually really what value am I getting here? And by asking the person for the same thing again. So again, your template design can really help support the project, but in some cases, it's adding an administrative nightmare on people to get their work done. Okay. Um, so the next thing I would say to you then is, look, people often get worried about putting an SOP in place because they'll say, Seamus, look, we've got so many different size projects around here. And if we put an SOP in place, it's just going to create an overhead on us that we don't need for some of the smaller projects. And one of my customers at the moment, they've got, I don't know, they're spending a few hundred million again this year. And they have all the structures around the big project, say that's costing, I don't know, a few hundred of the 500 million. But they've got all these small projects that are all BAU projects, is what they call them. They're spending way more than the big project when you add them all up, and there's no control on those whatsoever. Everyone's doing their own thing. So when you think about it, it's mad that we've great control here on a few hundred million, but we've got about 300 over here where everyone's doing their own thing. But they were conscious of not putting, a big project management structure on the small projects, but they did want to get some structure. And that's what I've done for them, is to say, okay, projects above a certain size, projects beyond a certain duration, projects beyond, depending on the number of departments involved or the business impact, they would score higher and they would need more project management rigor around them. With smaller projects, we would put in place what we call PM Light, a light version of the process that, yeah, you still need a scope statement. We want a high level schedule, a simple risk register, and we want a progress report from you. So the SOP at the start kind of sets out, says what type of project have you. There's a simple tool and it says, okay, you score above this, you go this route. You score below this, you go the PM Light route. So again, start to think about it that it's not about one size fits all, because that does frighten people, and you don't want a burden, an overhead. You want project management to add value. You don't want it to add an administrative nightmare, but you want people to think about scope, schedule, risk, stakeholders, comms. Doesn't have to be a big template. In one company, I've done what's called a plan on a page. It's a simple one pager, but it prompts them for, they might have a project, putting in a new piece of equipment, something small for, a few hundred K, but there has to be a plan. There has to be at least a plan on a page. You can't have people going off, running, because then they forget about, impacts to the business. So start to think about your process if you have it. Is it too heavy? And in many companies, they might have an SOP, but it's not being implemented. So think about auditing some of your projects to say, are we just paying lip service to this SOP? Are we really living it? Is it actually working for us? Is it fit for purpose given? And that's what happens in many companies. They've put one of these things in place and it is no longer maybe fit for purpose. So start to think about that as well, please. Why follow the PMI guidelines? Well, it's not just the PMI, it's other best practices. So in our case, we'd be taking PMI, and we'd also be taking, best practices that we'd have seen in academic journals. We'd have seen stuff in different academic material. And I suppose that's the thing, is that you don't know what you don't know. So sometimes you could be thinking you were doing a great job on something here. But your thinking might be, something from 10 years ago, and the thing has moved on maybe, or it might still be right. But it's no harm at times to just say, actually, let me take a step back here. Is this the right way of approaching scope? Is this the right way of approaching scheduling? Is this the right way of approaching risk? Is this the right way of approaching financial management or whatever? And review, redo, and then implement your SOP and get it working. Stop letting it gather dust on a shelf, start to use it. So, but the main thing I would say is that PMI stuff, or any of this literature, at least it's something based on industry best practice. So you, as I said, you don't know what you don't know. So very often there's good practices in these documents and other literature. And I suppose, again, at the end of the day, it's really ensuring that, we have the same process, we have the same best practices across multiple divisions. What can we do to help you? And as I said, I'm conscious of time always on these webinars. I know we've only got about 30 minutes. All I do for a living, basically, is we help companies write their SOP, making sure it's fit for purpose, informing them of best practices, etc. So sometimes people might just give me their SOP and their processes or whatever guidelines they have, their templates, and just review them, analyze them, critique them, what's good, what's bad about them, and open people's eyes to maybe what better looks like. We usually adapt them then to, or else work with a person and consult on it. Or else we can give somebody, if somebody has nothing, we very often have to draft an SOP to get them started and say, look, this is what kind of a vanilla version of an SOP should look like. No, you tailor it from there. And very often companies, there's a lot of very smart people I meet every day. They say, we could do this ourselves, but we've got a business to run. And that's the way a lot of companies are. They're struggling to keep the projects going, and they don't have time to write the rule book around stuff. Okay. But very often we come in as a partner to help companies write their SOP, and then obviously deploy it, train the people in it. So then after a while, it becomes part of what we call nearly your muscle strength. This is how we do things around here. And over time, maybe you don't no longer need to do the SOP or be, refreshing it, because it just becomes a way of doing something in your company. And then when you're doing lessons learned on projects, you can look at your SOP and say, actually, it's that step there is wrong, or that template could be improved, or whatever. You've something then to, do the full, 360 loop on it to try and fix your process. Okay. But if it's not documented, really, you're in trouble. Okay. I suppose, look, I'm going to park it at that point. We've got 25 minutes done. But is there any questions from anybody on this idea of writing an SOP? If there is, I'll take them. As I said, it's an invaluable document. One company I've did one for recently, the guy I gave the SOP to, he said, we've been kicked about by so many people further up the line on how I do this, how I do that. Why did you do it that way? And he said, no, I'm just going to say, I followed the process. And he said, that's going to be my biggest defense on some of these things. This is how we do things. If you want me to do it differently the next time, well, then let's update the SOP. But stop beating me up if I follow the process. And that's the one thing you should think about, back to my opening story. The process can help you, and it can help you defend your decisions in certain scenarios, saying, well, the SOP said this, and that's what I did. And always fall back on that. Sometimes your decisions can be called into question after, if you have nothing to defend you. You say, well, I made the decision. They say, but that was a crazy decision. You say, but I can only make the decision based on the information I had at the time. And the SOP said, if I have this, I do this. And I've been, at many meetings over the years where one senior manager said to me once, I need a detailed budget, before I go through this gate or whatever on a project. And I said, look, it's not possible to get a detailed budget at this point. And he goes, well, I don't care. I'm not signing off. And I said, well, the process says I just need a rough order of magnitude at this point. And it became a bit of a Everyone said, actually, you're right. That's what we need to go through this gate. We need a rough order of magnitude. We do not need a detailed budget. And again, that's one good thing to understand in a good SOP. Your gating criteria is defined, and you're not getting, curveballs in from senior management saying, I want a WBS or I want a granular schedule. You say, actually, no, the gating criteria says this. This is what I need at this gate for the gate to open, etc., etc. So it gives everyone very clear guidance on, what's expected and what's unfair to ask of you as a project manager. Okay, so I'll park it there. For the people that are here today, if you have any questions, I'll answer them. If you're not here and you're watching this after, well, then just reach out to Educate 360 if you want to talk about your own situation with respect to your SOP. Okay, thank you, Mariella. Is there any questions there from anybody?
I think that'll do it for us today, Seamus. So thank you
Okay.
so much. And if anyone needs any more info on this topic, please don't be afraid to visit us at velify.com. And if you missed out on any part of this session, we will be sharing a recording with all of you in an email. Thank you so much, Seamus.
Okay, thank you, everybody, and have a nice weekend. Bye bye now.
Alrighty. Bye, everyone.